Hi everyone, it's Lynn from Blue Calla Patterns. In this video I'm going to show you how to make an adjustable crossbody strap using only cork, and you can use this same method if you want to use only vinyl. Now you're going to want to cut two pieces full width. So I have two pieces here. They are both 2 inches wide and they are 58 inches long, which is the full width of a piece of cork. Now you're going to want to trim off the ends here because, as I mentioned in a previous video, the cork is thinner and weaker along the edges. So I usually trim off 1 inch. You don't need to trim off much more than that because when we're attaching the pieces, you're going to see that we're not going to be, most of this end piece is not actually going to be sewn into the strap. So just going to trim off the ends here. Alright, and then what we are going to do is we're going to take one piece and we're going to lay it right side facing up. Then you're going to take one end from the second piece of cork and you're going to line them up this way. And then, so you want the edges to be perfectly aligned, and then I usually clip them together because I don't want them to move. And then I take a ruler and I draw a line from the corner here, right here, the corner, to this corner here. So you're going to have a diagonal line. Now I'm going to go over to my machine and I'm going to sew along this line, and I make sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end, and then I'll show you the next step. So now I have my pieces sewn together and I stitched along this diagonal line. Now I'm just going to trim the corners off, and I leave about a quarter to 3/8 of an inch within the seam allowance. Now if I pull, you'll see that I now have a continuous piece. Now I don't want to leave this the way that it is, so I am going to open up this seam allowance, and then I'm going to go back to my machine and I'm going to top stitch along both sides of this seam with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I've top stitched the seam allowance along both sides of the seam where I join my 2 strips of cork. Before I join the other 2 sides, now's the time to add on your 1 inch rectangle slide. You're also going to need 2 1 inch swivels, but we're going to add those a bit later. Now this can be a little bit tricky because your piece of cork is really wide and you have to kind of fold it so that it slips through a 1 inch slide. I tend to just sort of fold it. Here we go. And then it kind of slides in. So now here's an important part. You don't want to have your strap pieces twisted at all. So you're going to do the same, but first make sure that the entire length of your strap is right sides together. And then you do the same, exactly the same as you did to join the other sides. You lay one piece right side up and the other piece wrong side up, lining up the edges here. You clip and you draw your diagonal line and you do exactly the same. You sew them together, making sure to backstitch, and then trim off your seam allowance to 1/4 inch, top stitch your seam allowance, and then you're going to have one continuous loop of strap. I now have a complete strap loop, and you're going to see you have 2 seams where you've joined the pieces together. Now before we continue, you have to draw a line through the center of the strap piece on the wrong side along the entire length of the loop. So it should be directly in the center with 1 inch of space on either side of the center line. You're going to bring it over to your machine, and you're going to start by folding in one side of the strap, wrong sides together, with the raw edge here right at the center line. And you're going to sew that strap piece in place with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the center line. So you're going to start and you're going to sew the entire loop, just the 1/2. Then you're going to do the same, and you're going to sew the second half of the strap. Same thing, you fold it and then you sew it in place with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the center line. And then when that is done, we'll come back and I'll show you how you sew the layers together. I've now sewn both sides of my strap in towards the center. I'm not sure if you can see that very clearly. And I have a complete strap loop, for lack of a better word. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew this loop into a single strap. Now make sure that you have the raw edges on the inside hidden in between the layers, and you're going to flatten the loop along the entire length of the strap. And as you're doing this, you're going to clip the layers together. And you want to make sure that your edges are lined up, because you don't want to have an edge of your strap not even, and it just doesn't look nice if the edges don't match. And you're going to do this along the entire length of the strap. The most important part here is to make sure that the raw edges are inside where you can't see them. So I'm going to go ahead and clip the entire strap together. Now, one thing I should mention about this type of strap is if you're not comfortable with using rivets to attach your swivel at the end, you really need to make sure that your machine can sew through 8 layers of cork or vinyl. So when you're trying to attach them this way, once you have your swivel inside at the end, you need to make sure your machine can sew through all of these layers. So I highly recommend that you do a test first. Otherwise, if you're comfortable with rivets, you can go ahead and just use rivets in the final step. So I'm going to go and I'm going to finish clipping this together, and then I'm going to go and sew it. The way that you sew the layers of the strap, I usually start near the slide, and you sew along the outer edge with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and you sew all the way down until you get to the end. And then once you're at the end, you're going to sew across. Here again, I keep a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then you sew all the way up across the other edge until you get to the slide, and then you sew across, and then you make sure you backstitch. So essentially, you're sewing a giant rectangle to sew your strap pieces together. Alright, I now have my sewn strap loop, and I've set a rivet here right by the slide because I do like rivets quite a lot. And it's fairly easy to finish setting up your strap. All you do is slide the one end without the slide through the D-ring of your swivel and then pass it through your slide again. And then all you do is, you're going to have this here, all you do is slide the end through the D-ring of your second swivel, and like I said, either you can sew this in place if your machine is fine with the bulk, or you can use rivets. I'm going to use rivets. Again, I'm not going to show you how I set my rivets because I use an anvil and hammer and it's quite loud on video. So I'm just going to rivet my strap and then I'm done. To attach your crossbody strap to your Boronia, you just hook one end of your strap to the rectangle ring on one side and then clip the other to the ring on the other side opposite, and then you have a crossbody strap.